Pastor Alex and Kevin, Dr. Kevin, have chatted the last couple weeks a bit about King David and Messiah, sort of as a general sense, and certainly with this afternoon's performance and sing along. By the way, it's a sing along. And so I'm taking a little different tack today. So Pastor Alex had brought up these questions of like the expectations of what the Messiah was going to be like. Of course, he talked a lot about King David and what he was like. But not even by that. In our scriptures, we have in the Hebrew scriptures, particularly in the prophets, we have these sort of descriptions, these experiences that people had, these desires that people had for the Messiah. And I didn't hear all of Pastor Alex's things, so he may have said this, I don't know. But in Isaiah, sort of famously, somebody you would not expect is called the Messiah. It is King Cyrus of Persia, who is very not Jewish. You may or may not remember that the Jews were, I guess they would have been the Israelites, I suppose, at the time, had been invaded in 586 BCE, the temple destroyed, tons and tons of people taken into captivity in Babylon, right? This is sort of a seminal moment for the history of the Jews. And they were in captivity for 50 years, and eventually they were sent back home. They were sent back home by King Cyrus of Persia. It was just his policy not to take a lot of prisoners. He was the one who took over Persia at that 50-year mark, took over Babylon, sort of yet another invasion, because that's how we do. So he took over Babylon, and he was like, who are these people? Send them home. Why are they here? So they got to go back home. And that's like how phenomenal, how amazing, how exciting they got to go back and be in their homes and like plant their gardens and rebuild the temple and all the things, right? Huge. And so they call, in their scriptures, they call King Cyrus the Messiah. Because it's different than what we think of now. Messiah means anointed. It doesn't mean there's only one. We, in our theology, interpret Messiah as there's one dude, but one person, who's going to save everything, right? For them, Messiah means anointed. It is a person who is going to save. And one can be saved, one's community can be saved multiple times. One hopes, in fact, that we saved multiple times because good things happen and then we're back in it again, right? So, anointed is what Messiah means. Anointed one. And then the Latinization of that is Christ. Jesus the anointed, Jesus the Christ, right? That's where we're getting this terminology from. So when they talk about him, when they talk about the Messiah in Hebrew scripture, it is certainly a Messiah, but it's also very clearly someone who's going to fix things. Things are bad. We can't, this is untenable. Somebody's got to come in and fix it. It's definitely political, it's definitely military, it's definitely like any of those sort of your experience, your physical, emotional, social experience is going to be better because the Messiah comes, right? I know you also know when Jesus is talking to people and like the disciples are like, so you're the Messiah, right? You're the one who's going to come fix this. And he's like, I mean, yes, but like not the way you think, right? So many people when they heard him, and it's not just him, like there were lots of people, as there are still now, who would show up and say, you know, I'm it. I'm the one you're waiting for. I'm the military leader. I'm going to change things for you, right? Yeah, please. No, go for it.
Yes, you talked about Babylon.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know we're in Persia because Persia is now Iran.
Yeah,
but where is that? Where was?
Yeah, it's in those kinds of areas. Yeah.
Okay,
The boundaries shift
a
lot.
Okay, I was just trying to.
Yeah, it's still ancient Near East. You're still right in that space. Yeah, sort of Iran, Iraq, etc. Yeah, no, you're totally right. So they're asking Jesus, are you the guy who's going to come and fix it? You gonna get rid of Herod because he's awful. He's maybe not quite as bad as his dad, but like, woo, he's not good. He is not good. Are you gonna fix the political system? Are you gonna get rid of? Are you gonna lift the boot heel off of us because we are oppressed by the Roman invaders? Right. This is what they want. I cannot tell you how much I identify with that. I want things to be different. I want them to be fixed. I want the presence of God to mean that nobody is in pain anymore. Right? Like I said in my sermon, it's a little bit of a joke, but like, I wanted to talk to this trauma specialist because she was going to tell me how to fix it. My own anxiety around the situation. If I talk to her, she's going to give me the checklist so that I will no longer be anxious. And she's going to give me the checklist so that my students who are in the midst of trauma no longer are having flashbacks and are totally fine, well-adjusted members of society. Of course I want that. Don't you? But that's not what they do. That's not what Jesus does. And so it becomes this question historically, right, for those disciples who were looking at Jesus, or even the people who went down to see John the Baptist. It just occurred to me that I don't think I have my mic on. I don't. Maybe you'll be able to hear me better. I don't know. Maybe the people online will hear me totally differently now. Great. Anyway. The people of that time, of Jesus' time, those who went out to see John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness, and those who, followed Jesus around, heard that he was healing people or whatever, what were their expectations of what he was? Certainly people call him rabbi, as a teacher. They call him, they say, maybe he's Elijah returned, who was a prophet, but who was also a bit of a military dude, right? I mean, there's you still have shades of that. You're going to come fix everything, right? Everything's going to be better because things are bad. If the Messiah comes, if you are it, I'm going to be able to see with my own eyeballs everything is better. Obviously, the way I want it to be better, right? Because the way you want it to be better may be different than the way I want it to be better. But so they have these expectations, and they're thwarted. So I wasn't sure how many people were going to be here. I wanted to pause right there and ask you, what are your expectations? Like, if you think about, if you put yourself in the place of those disciples, or of the Israelites who are coming back from exile, you've got this anointed one, you've got this Messiah who showed up. What are you expecting that person to do? And I'm not asking you for like the appropriate spiritual response. I'm saying in your body and soul, if Jesus showed up right now, what do you want him to do?
Fix it.
Huh?
Huh? Fix it.
Fix what?
We need to get along.
We need to get along. Huh?
Well,
No more anger.
No more anger?
I kind of flip on what Kathy is saying, but there's so much anger today. There's so many people are, just going against each other, stuff like that. We're just out of control.
Yeah.
And it just bothers me. So my expectation would be that something can be done to fix all of this. It just, you know what I'm talking about.
It was an interesting phrase you just used, out of control.
What is?
I know.
It is.
Oh, I'm not judging that statement at all. I'm just noticing it out loud. Yeah, it feels out of control.
Just, the fact that we can't get along with each other, that people are killing each other, that there's so angry people. And,
Afraid to talk to each other.
afraid to talk to each other. Yeah.
You're afraid to reach out to help because you don't know how it's going to be taken.
Fear. So that is so fascinating to me. I don't know how much you guys follow Twitter. Not the Elon Musk level of Twitter. I mean the actual people who are posting things part of Twitter. there was a whole drama, like last week, I think, maybe the week before, I don't remember. It's ridiculous. This person was like, there's these new people who moved in next door, like in this apartment complex, and they look like college student age. This person, I don't remember how old they were, but they said that they noticed that there were just a lot of pizza boxes in the trash. And it seemed like the kids who were in that apartment just ate a lot of pizza and maybe didn't cook it, didn't know. Making some assumptions, but we're sort of like, huh. And so made them, I think, some beans and rice or something. Just some simple casserole kind of thing. And took it over and knocked on the door and like talked, and it wasn't like a super long thread, but kind of talked about, you know, that they got to know these neighbors and wasn't that lovely, and it was lovely. Then the comments started. How could you assume anything about those people? I can't believe. What if they couldn't eat the food you made? How offensive is that? What if they have sensory issues? They can't eat that food. How dare you cook for them?
That's what makes you afraid to really reach out to
Wild. But the people who this person reached out to received it in love. They were like, "This, look, somebody cooks you food, even if you can't eat it." You're like, "Thanks.
Thanks,
That's so, like, you thought of us. Thank you." Right? And most people would do that. But somehow the other people outside of the situation receive it and go, "I gotta be upset."
Getting back to your question, what do you expect?
Yeah.
When Jesus comes, you know, there's always two sides. No matter
At least.
you may want something so much, and the other person is completely opposite. So how is Jesus going to make everything right for everybody?
Sure. Right. So part of the expectation is I will get what I want and you get what you want, and we will both be totally fulfilled. I know that feeling. Any married persons feel that feeling? Or divorced persons? Yeah. What else? Like literally, Jesus walks in the door. What do you want?
It's interesting about your point on expectation. Humankind is expectation. Whether you're Christian or not, or any other decision, inasmuch as on a level of expectation, it's binary. Either it is or it isn't. What are you for? Your expectation, or what are you against? So are you suggesting that Jesus came with the idea of what are you for, and everyone else's expectation, what is it against?
Yeah.
I'm on the boot heel. I'm against being persecuted.
Sure.
But I'm not saying anything about I'm persecuting my own neighbor.
Right.
So I'm wondering if that's not what the idea of expectation, i.e. Advent, is about.
Yes.
And about actual coming of Jesus.
Yeah, I think you're right. We certainly have expectations of a Messiah, and specifically of Jesus, that there's a clear right answer. Like it is binary, as you say, but it's not binary. We do not live in a world that is actually binary. Even in what you just said there. I want Jesus to be against oppression, and I believe he is. And also, if he is against oppression, that means the ways in which I am oppressing others as well, not just the ways in which I feel like I am being oppressed, right? So it becomes not just, it's definitely not black and white, it's at least black and white sitting next to each other, possibly a checkerboard pattern. And they bleed into each other, right? So that the expectation that God's presence is going to change things is true, but it's not what we think it's supposed to be. That old joke about, isn't it wonderful that God believes in the exact same things that I do? Right. That's the struggle. When something comes up and you say, that's not what I want, how do I open myself into the space but it might be something that someone else needs? Right? So let's pause for a second. What's my segue here? when Jesus does show up, like we're saying, he brings something different. It's not what we expect, right? So the disciples all sort of had this sense of like, so you're like, next week, in a month, in a year, like you're gonna march on Jerusalem. Like we are the beginnings of an army. Even the night before he was crucified, Peter still got a sword on him and like strikes off the ear of the servant. Right? They still got this mentality. This is how we're doing. This is what's going to happen. And he shows them, and he's been showing them the whole time. He's like, no. And Pilate says, oh, so you're a king. He's like, no. I mean, you're saying that, but not the way you have had kings. Not like that. Different kind of thing. So I want to know what that different kind of thing is from you. When you have had moments, and maybe you noticed it while it was happening, and maybe it was sort of a retrospect, you look back and go, huh, that was Jesus showing up in another person or in an experience, right? That was not what I expected, but was what was needed.
Well, I can think of when we were with my mother when she was checking out on us. My uncle was a pastor, so we had family communion, and when that was over, the look on my mother's face that she, communion, God loves you, and so then the next day she passed away. But I mean, just to see that relief from getting the communion. Never forget that. Relief
and her experience of God being present, and you saw it in her.
Yeah.
That was a gift to you as well.
Right. It was all of us who were there, we all noticed it.
Yeah.
And it was a gift to us.
Yeah.
I mean, she was struggling, that kind of stuff, but it was a gift for her. She just so relieved.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. And so often, like outside of those kinds of moments, we would think God's presence means she'll be healed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Well, and she was struggling. She didn't want us to be mad that she wasn't going to be with us. That's the kind of person my mother was. So she didn't want us to be mad that she wasn't going to be with us.
Yeah.
So just to see that, just.
Yeah. Yeah.
You bringing that up, it brings me back to my mother, and yes, my sister, the doctor didn't think she was going to survive the night, and before my sister left, she said, "Mom, it's okay. It's okay to let go."
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the doctor said, "You're the oldest. You got to talk to your mother first, and you got to tell her.
Yeah.
That's her time. It's okay.
Yeah. It's all right. Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah.
It is amazing. I've probably told those stories before, but I remember working in the hospital in two different. There was an old man. He was probably 95. Who was I had the pneumonia floor basically, and he had been in it now a couple times. And they eventually took him to the ICU, and he was on full code, meaning they had to do everything every time he stopped breathing or whatever. Like they broke his ribs. It was the whole thing, because his daughters refused to let him go. Like he was clearly dying.
Yeah.
Everyone in the hospital knew it, except for his daughters. And it was so hard to walk into that room with them and watch them praying, like, bring him back to health, bring him back to his youth. And we're like, he's 95!
Yeah, but he wants to go.
I think he did, and I think he was clinging on for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was another family for whom, Dad was in the ICU, and the family came in, I went in with them, and his daughters, it's also daughters, said, we love you, and it's time to go. And he did.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. And I think I honestly think, not that God was not present with the daughters who didn't want to let their dad go. I feel like that's also like, I can imagine God being in that room with them and going, oh, babe, I know.
And I
It's so
sometimes say, no way. There's something my dad said to me before he passed away, and I was in Michigan, he was in eastern Pennsylvania, and about his one brother passed away, and 2 weeks later he said to me, whenever God wants me, I'm ready. And about 2 weeks later,
There was. Yeah. The readiness is really interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you a little comical thing about my mother. When she was checking out, and she gathered us around. She said, "Now, you are not going to spend as much money on me as we spent on your stepfather."
funeral?
Like,
Yes,
but
yeah.
she's-
Right.
Yeah, but that was
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
See, that's one of my last
Yeah.
wishes. You know,
I've already told my family, cardboard box, man. Like, you do not need to spend money on this thing. Anyway, off topic. Yeah, so I've been thinking about, so we've been talking about visitors and guests in the service over there, and this idea of the Messiah coming in. I don't think that my students are the Messiah, but I do think that I have experienced the presence of God in ways I did not expect. It's very weird, after 13 years of doing this, I now sort of expect the unexpected, so when it happens, it's like, oh yeah, there it was. But I didn't know that particular thing was going to happen. This semester, as one of my students said, the highs have been high and the lows have been low. It's been a lot this particular semester, and I'm hoping next semester is less so. But I had a moment most of the way through the semester when, and I said this to them at Nosh that week. I said, I fall in love with you guys every semester. The new faces, new people who show up, but also the people who've been around. And it's a kind of a weird way to say it that way. I mean, obviously it's not a romantic love, but like every semester, there's a point where I sort of, and I hadn't thought about it that way before, but that I fall in love with them. And it's because, so I had a seminary friend at one point say, heaven is perfect, and when another person shows up, it's more perfect. And that's kind of how I feel about this community at the Edge House, is it's not perfect. Set that part aside. But in that sense, heaven is perfect, because the people who need to be there are the ones who are there.
God put them there.
Yes.
That's God showing
And then when
up.
someone else comes in the door, it's even more.
I can imagine how if someone comes there that's kind of struggling and they kind of get accepted by the group, that's got to be very rewarding to see how that works.
It is. I mean, this one student who's really, really struggling right now, like knowing the story that he has about his family and his faith life when he was growing up, I honestly don't really understand why he's here at that house. Why would he come to a Christian space, given the abuse that he experienced? And we talked about it a little bit over the week, and he was like, I don't really know. Like, I met you on campus, I met a couple of other house people, I'm like, you seem like cool people, but like there's, why would I? But he's like, but I found myself coming that with that first nosh. And he didn't leave.
Because he felt welcome.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, right? Like, I think a lot of people would say, like, all right, I mean, let me just tell you this. I have 3 awards in my house that I lovingly describe as the least objectionable Christian award. I've gotten them from 3 separate LGBTQ organizations, just like their annual banquets or whatever, and they're fine, they're lovely. I accept them for what they are, but like, just because I am the least objectionable Christian that this particular group of people knows at that moment does not mean they're going to come to my church. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And he chose to come for whatever, and he's not entirely certain why he came either. But he's there, and
It's a God thing.
he has found a new family. And so, again, he's not the Messiah. I'm not the Messiah. That's not what we're saying here. We're talking about God showing up in ways we don't experience, right? Are there other experiences of that? That was my particular one about the Edge House. Do you have other experiences? Again, even if you're looking backwards at it and going, oh, when have you felt that connection, that wholeness? Definitely in the midst of challenge. I mean, it doesn't necessarily fix everything. But maybe you've also had moments of like just extreme peace. The experience of, it actually is going to be okay.
Well, I'm really strong. My next door neighbor, he lost his wife to cancer a few years back. And he's been very lonesome and depressed and everything like that. And they used to have dogs, and dogs all died and stuff like that. And he works at Cincinnati Public School. He's a security officer. And he's outside one day, and this dog comes up to him and just attaches himself to him. and we're talking about it. He says, I'm convinced that my wife is in heaven, and she sent this dog to be my companion. That's great.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not alone.
He's not alone. Not alone.
Similarly, I remember being in the hospital briefly. I wrenched my neck basically. I was in the ER, but I was in a different town and there was nobody there that I knew. And I was miserable. Like it wasn't dying or anything. I was in pain and it was hard. I was by myself and I called my parents. Eventually, and of course, because I'm not bleeding, I had to sit and wait for a long time. Eventually I got into a room, did a triage or whatever, and this priest walked to the door. And I was like, I know you. Why are you here? And he's like, well, your dad called me. The Episcopal Church, it's true for the Lutheran Church too, the Episcopal Church has people everywhere. So he just called somebody he knew in that town and said, hey, my daughter's in the ER, can you go visit her? And he did. And again, he's not the Messiah either. But in my dad seeing that and choosing to call around, and Father Matthew saying, yeah, I got time, I'll go. Right? He was, as I said in my sermon, right? The open hand, willing when this thing shows up. That was 100% the presence of God. And we didn't even talk about anything particularly spiritual or deep. We talked about my neck, we talked about the weather, and then he left. And I was left feeling that I wasn't alone. That presence was huge. How does, oh yeah, go ahead.
I belong to a garden club. We don't garden anymore.
Love it.
Eat, but
Yes.
we're all up in years.
Uh-huh.
I think our oldest one is 93. But recently, because we have all known people who have died recently, we've been talking about that and the end of life and what we want. And so, it's kind of interesting. You sit around with your friends, people you've known for 40 or 50 years, and talk about leaving.
How vulnerable is that conversation? Yeah. To know even closer that there's an end.
And not be worried about it. In fact, I think because of some experiences that we've had, it'll be a good thing.
No, I understand. I have a sister that's she'll be 95 in March. Okay. And she lives in a retirement independently, bless her, because she fell when she was 88 and she had a brain bleed. And they said the only reason they operated was because she was in such good mental and physical health.
Sure.
And they didn't think she'd ever live again independently, and she is.
And she is,
Yeah, in this retirement community, but she has talked about all the people she has seen. She said, I'm one of the oldest ones here now. She said one lived to 105, another one to 101, and her daughter keeps telling her she's going to live until she's 105. But she said, I see all these people, I make friends, and then they pass. And, And I think you have the acceptance of, and I think as we get older, we accept it easier.
Yes.
When we're younger, it's hard to look at,
Thinking of the Dylan Thomas poem, rage against the dying of the light. Do not go gentle into that good night. Yes. Now, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and say, to me, all of that we just talked about has a bit of a messianic experience, right? It's sort of seeing the presence of God in ways that we don't expect necessarily, but also they're kind of ordinary. I mean, that's honestly a big part of the Gospel of John in particular, which is kind of funny because the beginning of the Gospel of John is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You're like, oh, it's so cosmic and beautiful, and transformative or whatever. And the Gospel of John is, of the four, the most physical about Jesus. I believe that's the one where he spits in the mud to make the guy be able to see again. Jesus is very clearly depicted as eating. It's the one where one of the resurrection appearances. He's one of us. He is very physically human. And how important that is, right? And how average that is, right? We all go through this kind of stuff, and so does he. Is this one thing in the Gospel of John. So there's like this ordinariness about it, but I don't want to give short shrift to the extraordinariness of the presence of the Messiah. Things change massively sometimes when God shows up. We have a particular perspective on the world, and instead of going, isn't it great that God agrees with me, sometimes we hit a moment where it's like, oh, really? Okay, I gotta do something different now, right? I think about people who have, I think there's a story a million years ago. I can't remember exactly how many of these guys there were, but these essentially fresh college graduates had got business degrees or math degrees or something. I don't even know. And these like 4 or 5 guys got an apartment in New York together, and they became essentially like hedge fund manager types. I don't know exactly. I don't finance, but something like that, where they were making a ton of money. The 5 of them had some sort of experience while they were in college when they said, we are not going to do this just to make money for ourselves. So they got this apartment together, and the 5 of them, or however many there were, went to their jobs and made a ton of money and gave it all away. Can you imagine? To be brought up in a culture that says, get as much as you can for yourself, take care of yours, get a bigger and better house. And they lived in a small apartment in New York City, and they made tons of money and they gave it all away. Who does that? I don't know their exact experience, but I would say they had an encounter with the divine. Messiah showed up, and they went, oh, okay, I'm doing something different, right? I wonder, maybe it hasn't been that big a deal, but I wonder if in your own lives you've had moments where something shifted massively like that. Your thought process about somebody, or how you were operating in the world. How is that? Have you ever had one of those where it suddenly shifted in a big way?
I just think as we get older, things just change in how we see things. And sometimes people get really cynical. And other times I think, I'm hoping, hopefully in my case, that I'm trying to like feel what it's like to step in their shoes.
Yeah.
And have a kinder look.
Yeah. I feel that.
So I can't say it was a big moment, but
Right.
it was a moment where you're just like, until you really walk in your shoes, don't be so judgmental.
Yeah. Is the window making a weird sound? It's odd. Anyway, hearing something behind me.
Bill and I have often had doors slammed in our face that we thought, but then miraculously another door opens and another opportunity has presented itself, and life was good. But at the moment, we didn't think it was going to be so good, but we just had faith that it was.
So the presence of God is sometimes a no. Not this one.
Yep, it wasn't our choice, but yep, it always has worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think a lot of people think of me as just a big old weird liberal, which is not wrong, but I think there's an assumption, particularly as Roy was saying, like we're in a culture that is very combative, very contentious, and we tend to look at each other across the aisle with expectations of what the other person's like and what they care about and whatever. And it's certainly true that one of the groups of people that we, well, that's not what I meant to say. What I'm trying to say is, it's definitely true that, I mean, this does not give me any special ability to really understand other people. I often struggle reading the news or whatever with people who I would say on the other side of the aisle and going, why? Why is this what is important? Right? And I imagine if people on that side of the aisle are looking at me and going, why do you think this is important? What is happening? And this is, I realize this is a very extreme example of this, right? I do not think of everyone who's on the other side of the political spectrum like this, for sure. These guys are extreme. But I remember watching the news when Charlottesville happened, and watching those angry young men marching through the streets and saying, "You will not replace us," and saying, first, of course, "What? Oh my God, what is wrong with you?" And then second, "Oh my gosh, what is wrong? What happened?" It was a weird shift for me to look at those guys and say, something happened. You have been hurt a lot by something. And I think that you are blaming the wrong people. But oh my gosh, I see your pain. I can actually see it right there on your face. Oh. And that was massive. Like, just like, it was wild. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means yet, but that felt like a God moment. God kind of tapped me on the shoulder and going, just because they're doing a bad thing does not mean they're necessarily bad people. Pay attention, you know?
What comes to mind, I have it on my car. Barbara Streisand sings, "Be careful." I don't even know the title, but it was something, "Be careful of what you say. Your children are listening." And you don't know how people are brought up. And I love that song. It's just, it's so meaningful to me. It's just like, yeah, really be careful what you say and what you do, because others are watching.
Oh, we can see you, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick side note, the clergy can see you in the pews. We know exactly what you're doing out there.
Who's asleep?
Who's asleep? Truth?
Making notes.
Who's texting? We're not judging you about it, right? We're just gonna see it. Who's dancing? Anyway, we're getting close to the end of our time here. And I have a suspicion that, yes, it's time. I have a suspicion that this was not exactly what you were expecting. Huh?
Oh, but we've had a good discussion though.
I think it's been a good discussion. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, so I don't know if this is even necessarily a conclusion, but you know, the birth of, again, I said this in my sermon, I've said it many times before, the birth of Jesus, the incarnation of God, is an apocalypse. It changes everything. It shows us things that are underneath. It shows us where we need to pay attention. It shows us our vulnerability. And I know that y'all know that. That's why you're here, right? It is both beautiful and lovely and charming and all the things that we think about around Christmas, joyful and all those things. And it is also really hard and scary. When God shows up, it is not what we think, and it's still scary. And that's okay. That's why the angels all say, "Do not be afraid." Because it's scary. What if I have to do something different? What if I have to be something different? Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Very good.
Happy 4th Advent.